Hello everybody, welcome to the Interesting Modelling Company Midweek Special, and we have a very special guest tonight in the guise of none other than Mr. Matt Irvin. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Jonathan.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And tonight we are going to be talking about the late great, is it Yanchus or Yanchus?
It is Yanchus. The name is Lithuanian in origin. I think the usual distinction is Lithuanian, not Czech, which basically would be Yanchus. But no, it's Yanchus, all syllables pronounced, yes. Yeah. Rather sad event to be on for it, but hey, let's celebrate the guy.
Well, I'll say let's celebrate Andy's legacy, because Andy was quite pivotal in some of Aurora's releases in the 60s and 70s, and you knew him quite well, and although Aurora fell by the wayside decades ago, Andy still had a hand in the legacy of Aurora with some of the spin-off companies, which we'll talk about a bit later on. But where would you like to start with Andy, in terms of, perhaps we'll start with his history with Aurora. So
yeah, well, I was going to say, I'll jump about a bit. Actually, people, I mean, frankly, most people say, well, how did you meet him? Well, I met him via the post, because this was pre these interweb thingies that we use these days, and even email. And I'd written my first article for Scale Model. I don't think it was even international at that time. It was Scale Models. It was August 1974. And I did my first article ever on space models. And I thought, hey, I'm going to write an article on space models and science fiction models, and it's going to be as complete as I could possibly do it. So I published it, and then I got a letter from a certain Andy Yanchus saying everything I'd missed out. And he was not slow in coming forward. So that was our first correspondence. And in fact, we corresponded, well, literally over the years, by post. I've still got filing cabinet here. Hey, if you know what a filing cabinet is, full of his letters. I kept every single one. We just, exchanging information, and we would send each other kits. I'd send him stuff that was British orientated, like Airfix and whatever, and even Revell. Hey, we had a Revell GB at the time. So kits that were coming from Europe, and he would, they were in Potter's Bar. In fact, for some time I lived only a mile away from them. And then he'd send me the American stuff. That's why I got a lot of the stuff that just wasn't in the stores over here. And that thing called, what's it called? Evil, but eBay or whatever, didn't exist. Nobody ever thought of it. Didn't around. So he was supplying me with stuff I couldn't get from over here. So that's how we sort of met. I mean, he'd actually joined Aurora, because he was still Aurora at the time. In '65, I think he probably 2021 or something like that. And he was always that's his staff card when he first joined, in the R&D department. Didn't have a number, unlike my BBC number, which we can all quote. They just said R&D department. But yes, that was him. He must have been age about 2021 there. But he stayed there, well, in fact, for a good 10 years or so, actually. He left. He didn't leave. He wasn't forced to leave, as it were, because Aurora closed, but he'd gone about 2 years before that. So he was there, and a lot of the prime time he was a project manager. I got told off at one point, but I called him a product manager. He said, no, I'm a project manager. There were two of us. I was one of them. So he's a project manager. And of course, because a lot of his interest was with the figures and the horror scenes and everything like that. That's him in the R&D department at around about that sort of time, I suppose. Don't ask me what's in the background. Machinery, R&D machinery, presumably. So yeah, he stayed there a good few years, working on. I was working across the board. He worked on a lot of the miniature, the HO model racetracks. I mean, here we're used to 32nd scale with Carrera and Scale Electrics, of course. In America, it was 24th scale. But it was actually Aurora developed the HO, and you think, could they get a motor that? Yes, they did. They got motors inside. So they had these little tiny tracks with HO gauge, which is 187th scale cars and trucks on them.
You mentioned the slot stuff, because I believe he appeared on the Ed Sullivan show at some stage, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Him and a colleague appeared. We've only got this very bad picture from a screen because it's pre-digital. This is wonderful American NTSC, which we call never twice the same color. It's the one you had the wonderful control called tint on it, which we never had on our machines over here. But Andy actually is on the far left of the picture in the striped shirt, and his colleagues on the far right. Now, the four guys, you probably actually the third one you might recognize the head, because that is Sterling Moss. Next to him is Graham Hill. There's also Jackie Stewart, I think is the far right one. Yep. And there was one American there, which is Dan Gurney. And they were playing with the Aurora track. And don't ask me what. I've got a feeling it was Jackie Stewart one or something like that. Hey, it's all in. If you can find a copy of Car Model March 1971, the full story is in there.
All right, let's just bring that up. There we go. Yep. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah. In fact, that not that particular picture, but the actual article about it is in this issue, which is March 71. Probably available online somewhere or other.
So somebody's going to be flogging it on eBay somewhere.
Yep.
But you said he worked across various product lines. What was his input when it came to some of the license stuff that Revell did in terms of tie-ins to TV shows and things?
He worked. Well, it's got a slightly strange story here. They worked on the Green Hornet, the TV show that was supposed to rival Batman and never did. And the car, if you know your Green Hornet, either from the original TV series or from the remake, because they still used, it wasn't the same car, but they used the same original, which was a 1966-65 Chrysler Imperial. That's the car on the right here. That converts from, well, not converts, but there's a garage, or I should say American garage, that they drive the stock Chrysler on the left into. It locks in place, revolves around 180 degrees, and the Black Beauty, which is the name of the car, appears instead, and the clamps unlock. What they do about the gas tank leaking fuel and the acid falling out of the battery, I don't know. That was sort of artistic license. But the deal was, because Aurora wanted to, because they had a lot of licensing, a lot of other products, they wanted to license the new car as a model kit. And the deal they struck with the studios was that, hey, yeah, you can have the license, but you've got to build the effects models. And so Andy and two of his colleagues actually built these 10th scale model cars. You can actually see there, they look pretty, I mean, they've actually shot this correctly with my effects supervisor hat on. They've actually got down to the right sort of level to look at the cars. But obviously you can see, they've obviously shot this in the Aurora car park. You can see in the back lot there behind them, there are cars that are much, much bigger. But these were 10th scale, so they were quite big. So that was one, as Andy says, a one slightly odd job he actually had to do. And of course, being for television, there was no time. So I mean, I'm not sure the exact, but they probably only had about a week to do this.
Ouch! Yeah, blimey.
Yep.
And yeah,
yep. That's a long time in television.
Yeah, that is. But yeah, they did the tie-up with the Green Hornet. Did Andy have any? Andy have any input with any of the Batman stuff or any of some of the figures like Superman, the larger figures?
I'm pretty sure that the Batman, because for years and years and years, the only Batmobile in the original and best, which is what we call the George Barris, because he wanted to build it out of the Lincoln Futura car, concept car, in 3 weeks. That's the one, and that's the TV one. That's the Burt Ward and Adam West Batman. That's the car that. It's the most recognisable Batmobile. Sorry, all the movie ones, it's still the most recognisable Batmobile.
I think it's.
But they had the license to do that, which is presumably why they wanted the Green Hornet. But they made them in 32nd scale, which was, being a 24th scale model car guy, I always thought it was very odd they did them. And it's only in very, very recent years you can actually get a 25th scale model of the Barris Batmobile from Polar Lights, and it's very, very good it is as well. Might have enough years to get it right.
I wonder why they did it in 32nd scale. Do you think they were trying to break out the American market and appeal to the European side, or?
I'm not sure. They did actually have a tie-in through Aurora, Canada, with Playcraft in the UK, which was at that time was Corgi. So in fact there were some kits that appeared, and actually also owned the Aurora name in the UK or in Europe. So this is why some of the kits, early American kits, appeared under that name. But the Corgi Playcraft name was also tied in with Aurora. I don't know whether they thought the name, mind you, they did use the Aurora name, so they didn't use the AMT name, they used the Aurora name over here. It's one of those strange things, and unfortunately, probably everybody knows about it. It's now long gone because it's happened, before I got interested in this sort of thing. But they were issued over here. I can remember the Batmobiles around. Why it was 32nd? I do know, if you look at the Aurora catalogue from the time, they've got loads of cars in them, but they don't. Modern catalogue will say, hey, this is 32nd scale, this is 24th scale, this is 20th scale, whatever. No, they're just the cars. You had to. What they gave you was the length in inches. Being American, they never heard of the metric system. Mind you, nor were we at that time. So you had to work and think. Hang on a minute, that's only sort of 4 inches long. So that's going to be 32nd scale. Oh, that's 7 inches. That's going to be 24. There was no scale in the catalogue. So consequently, let's say they did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That was 25th scale. They did the Batmobile. That was 32nd scale.
Do you wonder whether or not that was a consequence of perhaps it was not so much that it wasn't the scale that was chosen, it was just they needed it to be a certain size, box wise, and it just ended up being 32nd by accident.
That was the time when kits were built to fit the box, and people say, oh, they didn't have a scale. Well, they had a scale. Everything's got a scale. They just didn't have a traditional scale. Revell was probably the worst at that, because they had, here, this is the size box we've got. We'll make this aircraft to fit the box. So instead of 72nd scale, you went the X-15, the most famous X-plane ever, X-15. For ages and ages and ages, you couldn't get a 72nd scale kit of the X-15. There was the Revell kit, but it was 1/69th scale because it was built to fit the box. And it wasn't until relatively recently, unlike, say, Airfix, that all of Airfix kits, with probably the miniature ships being the only or ships, the galleons in general, have all been constant scale. They started with 72nd scale with aircraft. They started with 32nd scale for cars. Their figures were 12th scale, constant scale. So everything, tanks for 76th scale, or OOHO, which isn't a scale, it's a gauge, but they were all the same size, or same scale. But everything except the ships. No, Revell. You look at the old catalogues, Revell, everything. Limbo was just as bad. It was probably Monogram, the first one that came up in America to do constant scale, and AMT with cars and set the 25th scale, because even originally Revell were using 32nd scale. So the whole business of scales is a minefield. It really is. I mean, I can witter on for years about scales. The only one we haven't been absolutely certain about is 1/35th. There's loads of rumours, but nobody's come up with the actual reason why military is 1/35th and not 1/32nd. But hey, we're not going to change it now.
We've got some questions, but questions are flying in here, so I'm just taking a note of them because we'll annoy you with some questions at the end of the show. So
splendid. I love being annoyed. Yes,
absolutely. We got a picture here. This is Andy outside.
This is Andy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he left in '75, I think, and drawn Marvel Comics as a colorist. But this was about this was the '90s, early '90s, and we drove out. Andy lived in New York, so he didn't drive. His sister Pat did drive. She had a Starsky and Hutch Torino, but he wasn't red with a white stripe; it was dark green. But she did drive. But Andy never drove. He said, hey, I can walk to the subway station. I know he knows all the buses. You live in New York, you don't need a car, basically. But anyway, if I I do need a car. And we drove out to West Hempstead, which is where Aurora was based. And the building, he said, this is my office. I was on the second floor, which, remember, in America is the second floor, not to us the third floor, because they're just getting used to calling the first floor ground floor. That he said, that's my office. Now, actually, we did go back there in later. It would have been in the 2000s. And it was a building site. It had been knocked down, so any trace had gone. There was also another strange story, because I never quite understood this. If you look at Aurora address at that time, it was Cherry Valley Road. It wasn't Cherry Valley Road. If the Cherry Valley was correct, it was Cherry Valley Avenue. But the boss at the time thought road sounded better. I'm thinking, why? Surely Avenue sounds better. But that's the reason. You'll see the address is actually, and in fact, I've got a picture somewhere of it. If anybody wants it, I'll send it to them. Actually, it shows the road sign, Cherry Valley Road. It's not Avenue at all. But obviously, the post still got there.
I was just going to say we mentioned I think we mentioned before the show about Revell having a UK subsidiary. Aurora actually had a UK subsidiary as well, didn't they? Because I remember back in the '70s the Star Trek stuff that was being promoted by Revell. I mean, bear in mind some of it was XAMT and some of it was Aurora Originals. But they were very big on telling everybody this. Rather charmingly, they described it as the BBC television series Star Trek.
Well, that wasn't Revell at that point. Revell didn't have anything to do with it. The only manufacturer of Star Trek items was AMT, which is a car company. So you're thinking, but then it licensed a lot of the what I call star cars that starred in things, and so I suppose the move to a star ship wasn't much of a jump. So that's where they got the first license to do the original Enterprise, the Klingon vessel, and a few other. They ended about 4 in that original series. But as I said, AMT wasn't really known over here, and Aurora in Canada got the license to do Star Trek, and that was the tie-in. So yes, Aurora came over. So there is an Aurora catalogue of that era, and on the box it says Aurora. But as I said, I think it was owned by Playcraft, which also in Corgi as well. These companies tend to be owned by bigger companies, which are owned by bigger companies. But of course, it was being sold in the UK, and which television channel was Star Trek on? BBC. So it's got BBC on the box. Whereas in America, it's got NBC on the box. The AMT kits have got NBC on the box. And these days, absolutely everybody makes Star Trek kits.
Yeah, it just always amused me that, like I say, when you come across some of the Aurora boxings, the Aurora UK boxings of the Star Trek stuff, it is described as the BBC's Star Trek, and it's like, well, they broadcast it.
Well, I mean, not did NBC make it, but it's still got a name on the box.
Yeah.
They were the transmitters of the program. So yes, that's the name they're going to know.
Yeah, and. Right, we will pop on to the next thing about Andy, and that is your friendship with him down the decades, and how
Right. Well, here we are. Yep. I'll talk you through them. Well, Andy there is obviously the one on the left. I'm obviously the one in the middle, and his sister Pat Yanchus is on the right, and they're outside the house in Brooklyn, North Brooklyn. It's a wonderful 3 up, 2 down brownstone, typical New York building. The stairs are like the rickety house at Southend. Literally, they are not flat. They're quite big, but they're they angle. Whether the house sunk at one point, but it's got 3 up and 2 down. It's got 2 basements. Typical American house. Not only got a basement, it's got a sub basement. And just down the road is Consolidated Edison, which is the power station. Apparently blows up with monotonous regularity, or there's a loud bang or something or other. And they're right on the East River, not the Hudson, the East River, and it does flood through it. I've known Andy saying, "Oh, the basement's flooded again," but no, that's where he lived basically all his life. That was the family house.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just been to the Intrepid, hence I'm wearing the Intrepid.
Yeah, and he was a modeler.
Oh, definitely. Now he absolutely was. Besides, working in people say about me, work for the BBC is BBC model maker. No, I was a special effects designer, but yeah, I made models as well. But Andy certainly was. Now, the house he lived in, what we would call the ground floor, what they would call the first floor, it was a restaurant for many, many years. I think they lived on the top floors of it when it was still a restaurant. Now, when they bought it out or took over the whole place, the ground floor, to us Brits, became Andy's display area. And here he is actually against one of his display. Wish I had cabinets that size to display all my stuff. And this goes the length of the length of the house, is actually the length of the restaurant originally. And he's got several of these, and in these cabinets, I think we've got a picture of a close-up coming up or something or other. Yeah, there's one. He built most things, but his main love was figures. And here, if you know your Aurora, at the background are the girls and girls of the world, or guys and girls of the world, something like that. There's looks like a Chinese, and is it Netherlands and something or other there, or boy, Sweden or something, or the Dutch boy. I wasn't right with Netherlands. On the left is the goldish figure is the Flash Gordon. That was the Revell kit. Down the bottom on the right, the two of the Aurora Cro-Magnon, the prehistoric. Aurora was never worried about timelines, so it had sort of people fighting dinosaurs. No, haven't they ever seen Jurassic Park? Oh, hang on, that's to say that they had the pre-Jurassic Park. So, and a load of the others. He was very, very keen on the robots, in fact. And I got told off once because I was slightly dismissive about the robots, and Andy sort of slapped my wrist and saying, they're a legitimate modelling thing. He had loads and loads of them. To me, they all look like, well, robots, but hey, everyone to his own. But yeah, that's just one cabinet. There was quite a few of those cabinets, probably about a dozen in all. So you can see how many models he had.
And we've got some pics here of, this is a collector's item.
Oh, that's a bit sad, really, because that is us on top of the World Trade Center in '93. That would have been Andy, myself, and my daughter Amy. And we would not only went up the World Trade Center to go up the World Trade Center, but actually to the right, if you looked over the railings, if you had the head for heights there, and looked down across the river, because remember, this is in Manhattan. He lived in Brooklyn. You could spot Con Ed, mainly because of smoke coming out of the smokestacks. But that was the road he was on, so we were just about to see his house. And in fact, when we got back, we climbed onto the roof, and I did the reverse angle shot, because obviously the Twin Towers were still there, and you could see them. So Andy in the foreground, the Twin Towers in the background. But so hey, we can't do that again for many reasons.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't have a head for heights, and that is absolutely turning my stomach at the moment. So we'll have to.
Well, actually, looking over there, that was actually, if you looked over at that particular point, you were not looking straight down. You were looking over to like balconies, so you were not looking straight down.
It's still,
unlike some skyscrapers. It's still high. Yes.
Yeah.
We'll go up the CN Tower, because there you can look straight down at the CN Tower in Toronto.
Yeah, that's not doing much good for me at the moment, Matt. So
all right, you better move on now. Right,
there's a story behind this one.
This was strange. This really was. This was in not that many years ago. It could have been 2018, maybe 17. Andy said, "Oh, there's a new place open in New York." New York to him is basically Manhattan, i.e. the island, rather than Brooklyn. And it's called Gulliver's Gate. Now, there are places like this around the world. Germany's got to be. These are basically model layouts, but very, very large. And if we, I mean, we could do a whole program just on this layout, these layouts. Anyway, we go there. We get on the subway because Andy is very familiar. We go to Times Square. Yes, it's right off Times Square. Wander down, and it's actually quite. You don't realise there's a sign outside it, but it's all on its, well, as we would say in Britain, the first floor, i.e. to then the second floor. And you go up an escalator, and it's basically its model of the world. There's a lot on New York there. It's based in New York. But there's the UK and other bits of Europe and Sweden with the Northern Lights there, and African countries and Indian countries with the Taj Mahal. It's extremely good. But as we were wandering through, in the corner of the main layout part, because there were side bits as well, you know, sort of diving off to see what, then come back again. We suddenly said, a sign said the model shop, and so I look at Andy, and Andy looks at me. Oh, look, you know. So we hurry across there, and there's a guy there, and I could see there was a 3D printer, and I'd already noticed actually because it was printing up a TARDIS. Now, all right. America's got used to Doctor Who. This was New Who era, but even so, that was strange. And I'd spotted one in the British layout, but all right, it's the British layout, so it's understandable. But anyway, I talked to this guy who is American, and I say, "Well, hi, I'm Matt Irving. This is Andy Yanchus. He was Aurora. I was BBC special effects. Just basically sort of sticking our nose in." And the guy says, "Hey, hang on a minute." And he rushes back, and he comes back with this guy, the one on the right, who says, "Good heavens, it's Matt Irving." And it's this guy I know, Adrian Davis. He's British. Meet him at Telford at the IPMS. And he runs the model shop there. So they've got a Brit running the model shop. So we had a tour around we're inside the model shop here. And they're doing a lot of 3D printing, hence 3D printing of the TARDIS. He says, "I want to get the TARDIS in every scene we've got around the world." He says, Australia, India, there's going to be a TARDIS in there somewhere. But he's also 3D printing aircraft. I think it's a 737, which Andy was interested in, because they're doing one of these big layouts, at the airport where the aircraft will take up and circle around and land and things like that. That wasn't quite ready when we were there, but presumably it is now. But they've had time to get it up to speed, probably. But so that was one of those very, very strange. I got to go 3,000 miles and meet somebody I know, who's also a Brit. But hey.
Oh, I must say, when I first saw that photograph, I thought it was Russell T Davis, but that's just.
Yeah, Adrian's taller than Russell.
Right. Okay.
Quite a bit. Russell's my height, if not shorter.
All right. Okie dokie.
No, I see what you mean. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's a lot earlier. That picture. Now, hey, you can probably recognise Andy from that, and me. The guy in the middle is Nick Argento. If you know your Glencoe models. Nick is Glencoe Models. I mean, talk about one-man operation. Yep, and that man's Nick Argento. I do his website for him. I'm the webmaster for Glencoe Models. But no, it's all done by Nick. We were at his place in Worcester, Massachusetts, many years ago, and we thought we'd have a picture together. And I was just about to do my Creating Space book, which is now over 20 years old. So we thought we'd take an appropriate picture. So I'm holding an appropriate model, that's the RM-1 rocket ship, and Andy's holding an appropriate model, that's the old Lindbergh's flying saucer. Nick, for some odd reason, is holding the USS United States. But hey, they're all vessels in some form or other, but it went in the book anyway. But so yes, that's the Three Wise Monkeys. And that we're back in New York now. You saw me in Intrepid, as in USS Intrepid, which of course is the aircraft carrier docked in New York Harbor. And in fact, me and Andy went there a few times. I think 3 times in all. This was the last time. It, again, was probably in the 2010s. And Andy on board the deck there. And I managed to get actually their only Russian aircraft in shot there, because most of it, of course, is American. But and you can actually see the Manhattan in the background there. Now, you mentioned since leaving Aurora, obviously Andy never got left the modelling side of things. And in recent years, I mean, relatively recent years, a new company started called Atlantis Models. Now, okay, they're bigger than Glencoe, because Glencoe is a one-man operation. This is a two-man operation, because these two, the two in the centre, is Pete Vetri, who's in the black T-shirt, and Rick DeFavio in the white, and me on the left and Andy on the right. And they run Atlantis Models. And what is reasonably well known is basically in recent years, like we're only talking about the last 2-3 years, when Revell's owners went belly up, and Revell basically was taken over by a German consortium and now run from Germany, mind you, it has been before. They didn't want many of the American tools, so they were going to scrap them. There's money in scrap tooling, and of course all the modelers were hands in, but Pete and Rick stepped in and bought the tooling, hundreds of tools. And they called on Andy, because they're based in Long Island, which obviously is part of New York State, as a consultant, and that's what Andy was doing. And a lot of the stuff, of course, they've got via Revell is Aurora, because Monogram bought most of the Aurora tooling. So a lot of the stuff in the cabinet you can see down there is actually original Aurora stuff, and they've got the tools for it. And they are turning out, heaven knows where they get the time. They're working on a 36-hour day, or they've got a TARDIS, because they're turning out stuff left, right, and centre. They're turning out more than the big companies are turning out. All right, the tooling is made,
yeah,
but even so.
I was going to say, just looking at that display cabinet there, I think I can spot at the bottom, it's the John F. Kennedy figure, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's what Aurora were going to do, a series of presidents. They did Washington crossing the Delaware, and they did JFK in his study. They never did any. It's one of those series that sort of, even in America, hey, you think do American presidents, but obviously, you know, like, hey, we'll do British prime ministers. No, that's not going to work either. Or Churchill might work. So yeah, they went to the two, and that was it. So yes, that is. So you never know; they might be seen again if the tooling has survived. I mean, that probably is an original. So it doesn't mean the tooling did survive. It doesn't mean automatically they've all turned them off from the mold. Yeah. Some of the molds they still can't get open; they're too heavy.
I say we've just. I'm just going to bring up the. For those of you out there, Atlantis can be found there at atlantis-models.com, and there are numbers of kind of wonderful Aurora stuff that they've brought back. Of course, the one that I was going to order, which was the Cheyenne helicopter, that's now actually no longer in the range. That's what you get for being slow.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
Certainly, from my perspective, you know, growing up in the 70s, the formative Aurora kit that I was bought was, of course, this fella. It scared the living daylights out of me that in the end, I think it had to be swapped with a friend for something else. I will actually get around to ordering one of these at some stage, but goodness me, that artwork still gives me nightmares. But see, this is what I have Aurora to thank for, because this and ITV screening around about the same time, actually, they screened King Kong versus Godzilla. That started a whole love affair with Japanese, kaiju ega cinema, and we could fill a whole program with that, but we're not going to. So
manga and anime, yes,
yeah, it's fabulous. But yeah, it's like I say, in the 70s. I mean, Aurora. The big thing that I was massively keen on with Aurora were the prehistoric scenes, and one of the kits that I got for my birthday, it's about my 6th or 7th birthday. And I did get the Aurora Styracosaurus, but we used to have a or horned dinosaur, they called it. But we used to have a toy shop in Wokingham called Cordings. And I remember walking past there one day with my mother, who's watching. Hello, Mum. And they literally had like a pyramid built up of the boxes of the prehistoric scenes, because they were square, these square boxes.
Yeah.
And talk about want. It was awesome. But they were quite pricey at the time as well.
The smaller series, there were two basic series. The smaller series, I think Atlantis have got. The larger ones, which Monogram had issued quite a few times, because it was a Monogram that bought Aurora, not Revell. And people say, well, Revell took over Monogram. No, they didn't. if anything, Monogram took over Revell. They were both owned by the same holding company. And it was Revell who moved to Monogram's plant in Chicago, not the other way around. But they were both independent companies. They just both ended up under the same banner. But of course, through that, the overall Revell, they used the Revell name because worldwide it was a better name. But it ended up with Revell kits, Monogram kits, Renwall, another old American name, and Aurora kits. And those examples of all four are now with Atlantis, and Atlantis instead of turning up stuff left, right, and centre. Really are.
Well, actually, we've got another picture here of.
That's a more recent one. Again, it's probably for 2 or 3 years ago. That again, you can probably recognise Andy in the middle, me on the right, Peter and Rick. The guy on the left is Phil Cepriano. He's again a modeler. He's actually a plumber by trade, but he's got a basement. I've been down there under his garage, under his truck. There's a basement that's full of stuff, a lot of Aurora stuff, and a lot of real originals and test shots and things. And I'd put this shot in basically because what we're leaning I mean, you can't quite see it, but I'm standing on my leg is the tooling. That is what steel tooling, and they are small tools. That is some of the Revell, Monogram, Grenville, Aurora tooling that Atlantis has got. But these tools, they are heavy. We're not going to damage them. But you could do Strictly Come Dancing, the whole lot on top of them. They're not going to move. They can weigh. They're measured in tons, and Atlantis had to buy the old winches and strong steel tables to hold these, and some of them are so heavy they still haven't managed to get them apart. That's what injection molding is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this would actually be a good point tonight to actually. I mean, I think I know the story now because I've been reading this excellent book by.
That's one of Tom Graham's books. Yeah. That's the third edition. That's the first. He's done 3.
Yeah.
The one you've got has got all the spin-off companies. It's got Mobius and Polar Lights and things in it.
I mean, I got to say, I've had a kind of like an interest. I always have an interest in the history of model kit companies, but getting this one, I pretty much. You can see it's a thick old book. I pretty much almost read
it is. You compare it with this one, you see how much Tom's added to it. It's double the thickness. I must get that one. I haven't got that one.
Yeah, cover to cover in one sitting because I was just like, and what happened next? Now, one of the great stories that has blown up into mythology down the years is what happened to a lot of the Aurora tooling. And yeah, exactly. I know because there is the story that they were being shipped to Monogram and the train derailed and they all ended up in a swamp. But that's not the full story, is it?
It's like all urban myths. There is a grain or a pennyweight of truth in that the tooling was moved from Aurora, West Hempstead, New York, to Morton Grove, which is a suburb of Chicago in Illinois. And there was a train crash, or there was a train derailment. 6 tools were slightly damaged. In the tops, they were slid, and things like the ejector pins was broken, all of which can be replaced. I think only one, which I think was the Gotha bomber, was damaged beyond repair. You'd have to make a new tool and things. But no, it is. The problem with Aurora, well, I said the problem, it isn't a problem, it's a situation. It's a bit like the BBC wiping tapes of Doctor Who. I mean, why did they do that? Because we couldn't reuse them again. The sell-through they were on 2-inch Ampex helical scan tape. The reels are this big, and that's only an hour. 2 episodes of Doctor Who. So that's why, and you can reuse the tape. With tooling, you can reuse the tool. A lot of Aurora tools weren't cut in steel; they were molded in beryllium, which is a copper compound.
Mm-hmm.
And this was mainly the figures and the dinosaurs. Anything that wasn't a set size, like an aircraft or a ship or a car, but a figure. left and right don't necessarily match up, but they're ideal for beryllium. It's still used, but you can reuse the beryllium, melt it down. It's quite expensive metal. Recast it. You can reuse the frame. So that's what Aurora did. The idea of collectability in the 60s, nobody thought of it. Kids, okay, it was kids. They built Batman. They wanted a new model. Oh, we want Superman. We've got Batman. We don't want, we want Superman. So that's what Aurora will do. And in fact, if you look through, in fact, there's another book, not one of Tom's, Bill Brugman's book. He lists all the variations of the numbering. There's one kit number, call it 543. It isn't that. So it's been used on 3 different kits. So if you want the number, like, so Airfix only reused the number 1. That's the number. Boom, that number's there. It doesn't get, no, Aurora reused they reused the mold, they reused the beryllium, they reused the frame. Oh, and they reused the kit number as well. That's why you can't get a lot of the old ones, and that's why the lost Aurora companies, which really only 2, one was Polar Lights and one is Mobius, survived. There were about 6 at one point, one including called, I think, Lost Aurora. Started to remold, and they reverse engineer the kits. They get a kit, probably off eBay at expense. They then repantograph the parts and make a new tool. So it's a new tool, but it is made from the original, but not from the original mold. So, and in fact, Mobius had a hand at doing this. In fact, what they would do, although Aurora kits were good, sometimes they could be improved. If you want a model of the 2001 Moonbus, get the Mobius kit. It's a lot better than the Aurora kit, and it'll be a lot cheaper. Because what Frank Winsper, who basically another almost one-man operation, who was Mobius at the time, did, was he took an opportunity to correct where Aurora hadn't got it quite right. Mm-hmm. So consequently, you've got a better kit out of it. But yes, it does, and the box art does look like the Aurora one because it's a nostalgia thing again. There's nothing like nostalgia. It's sort of it comes round and round again. Right?
I say anybody who's not familiar with the Moonbus from 2001, it's very much, how can I describe it? It's kind of like a baby eagle transporter. It's got that same aesthetic to it.
And you know why?
Brian Johnson
designed by Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just gonna say, yeah, we could probably do.
Brian Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Matt.
So I was going to say, no, Brian worked on uncredited because there's very, very few credits on 2001, unlike Superman and even Doctor Who these days. Credits go on longer than the program. No, there was very, very few people credited, and Brian did work on it as one of the special effects assistants as such, and part of which was helping with the design for the Moonbus, and he used, in fact, he used elements because he'd just come off of. He actually is on Thunderbirds, or probably the later ones, and he actually took on 2001. He did go back. I think he went back to Anderson afterwards. Can't remember. Ask Brian direct on that one. I've heard the story, but some of the details might be a bit foggy there. But he went to work on, much to Jerry Anderson's disgust, but I think he forgave him later, but so he could work on 2001. But there are certainly elements of the Moonbus that he then could reuse in the Eagle. Yeah, so that obviously came afterwards.
We like doing things on the fly here. I'm just grabbing.
Google it; it will come up probably.
I say here we go. It's I've literally just grabbed. I've actually found one of the Mobius.
Oh yeah, that's the second. That's the second box. The first box looked very much like the Aurora box. Yeah. That's probably a better box, actually.
Do you know what? I've just had a quick look online. How much do they want for that? 37 quid. Do you know what? I think we might. No, it might be a spending disaster at the end of the show tonight. Thanks, Matt. Always good to have you on the show.
That's up to you. I've already got it. I'm not too worried.
I say that's 37.
And I've got an original Aurora as well.
Yeah, that's But yeah, we're just getting towards the end here of. So some of you may recognise that globe.
That is the second biggest world globe in the world, because the first one is the one we're standing on.
Well, it's not a globe. It's not a globe, Matt. It's flat. It's flat. Didn't you know that?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, hey, that's another program entirely. This This was built for the 1964 World Trade Center in New York, and it's in north area of New York City. And yes, it's been in loads of Men in Black. if you're a CSI or Law and Order fan, as I am, well, they're not the ones that are set in New York, CSI New York, clues in the name. They'd often appeared in the background. And in fact, the two towers, which I think also appeared in Men in Black, which were restaurants, they're the only remaining part of the World Fair that still remains. And they're we're looking at the picture to the right of us are these two towers with what were the restaurants on top of it. But yeah, that's one we shot. I don't know when that was. That was probably mid 2000s or something or other when we went out there.
Interesting modelling company would like to point out that the world is in fact round. Just to clear that up.
Yes.
We do like to stick to our science on the show. Right, we've got about 10 minutes here, and we've got some questions that we'll field to at the end of the show. But we are going to get to, well, here's
very quickly. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, we're going to get to this.
Yes, this. Let's just see. It says on the cover there, Monster Scenes, the most controversial toys of a generation.
Yep.
Yes, I'm gonna let you lead on this, Matt.
Well, this is one of Andy's last projects that he did. As I said, he was always very interested in the creature side, the figure side that Aurora did, and he came up with his idea of doing smaller monster scenes. The guy in the picture there with Andy, and you'll probably recognise from the background that we're in Andy's display room, i.e., what was the restaurant in at 69 in Brooklyn, is Dennis Prince, and Dennis wanted to do a book and basically wrote Andy in to help him because he couldn't do it without Andy. Hence, the book does say both their names on it, on the table there, you can actually see some of the creatures. They're smaller scale than the original Aurora monsters, but Andy wanted to make more than. I mean, there were scenes like the Frankenstein monster was in a graveyard and Dracula had a tree with bats and things, but they were smaller, and the idea was that you could swap them around. You couldn't really swap like the Frankenstein monster with Dracula or the Wolfman or whatever. They were all individual. Here, the idea was they'd have more play value, but it is a lot of problems.
Yeah, they had interlocking bases, didn't they?
Yeah, and you could swap the bits around. I mean, we're used to customizing in cars. I mean, hey, as a car model myself, yes, I mean, the 3-in-1 kits. These are some of Andy's earlier ones based on these. He liked to put them on his own bases. He had these special bases made that were all the same. Actually, between you and me, they're the tops of Folger coffee jar tops. He used to keep all of those. And Andy didn't drink coffee. Pat did. I think the rest of the family did, but Andy didn't drink coffee. But the bases were all the same, but he'd just add bits to them, and he'd make up the figures and change the figures around and things. But oh dear, it caused one hell of a controversy. These kits. Aurora at that point. Yeah, Aurora at that point had been taken over by a larger company. Now, this is not unusual for model companies. They all have, Airfix has, Revell has, Monogram has, they all have at some point. Very few, except the very newer, smaller ones like Mobius and Pegasus and to a certain extent Round 2, which owns AMT, MPC, Polo Lights, Lindbergh and Hawk, is one smallish company compared with the size of, say, Revell or Airfix. But now, at the time we're getting into the 70s now, the original owners of the companies probably died off, retired, whatever, emigrated or whatever. And bigger companies, now they weren't necessarily, I mean, Monogram was probably best off because it was taken over by Mattel. At least Mattel was a toy company. Aurora was taken over by Nabisco. Make cereals. What's it got to do? All right, you find things in cereals, which are plastics possibly. But, it wasn't. And when this monster scene came up, there was a terrible reaction from, I was going to say the Daughters of the Revolution, which is possibly these days to say the Sons of the Revolution, that doesn't actually exist. And there were articles, books written about these. Oh, these models are affecting our little kiddie winkies. the thing is, the little kiddywinkies, all right, mainly the boys, loved the things. I mean, it was no worse than a lot of the comics that were going on, or actual toys, or heaven forbid, what about the movies, the Universal movies in the 30s? Even then, they would be generally available and probably classed as U in the UK or whatever we
Mhm.
call it these days, or unregulated in or PG or somewhere in the States. And eventually, they managed to get the whole series completely stopped. They all had to be destroyed. I'm not sure actually all the tooling was destroyed, because we know some did survive, some that wasn't released. And you could argue it probably killed Aurora, because Aurora ceased in 1977, and this was 76, 77. So it's not many model companies can have this. I was going to say claim to fame. It's a rather wrong way of putting it, but the notoriety, I suppose.
I seem to
But
remember
that's it.
reading that it was the ones that really caused the problems from the monster scenes were they were essentially like the torture chamber and things like that. And what
Yeah, but
Aurora tried to do was they actually tried to put I think they put a comic in with the monster scenes things to actually. I think the narrative they tried to do in the end was that, oh no, this Dr. Deadly and Frankenstein monster, they're not evil. They're just looking for love. That's all it is. And it's like, yeah, does that
yeah.
really make things better, Aurora?
You have to remember Aurora. One of the Aurora kits that it did do, which again was going to be part of a series, but was the guillotine.
Which was part of the Madame Tussauds series, but then
yes, it was going to be part of that. And then he never did the
yeah,
one.
but apparently that was because they had a bit of a falling out with Madame Tussauds over that. But they were going to follow that up with. I mean, we try and keep it PG rated for 8:30 in the evening, but two of the other ones they were working on was Iraq, not Iraq
Yep.
the country. That would have been quite a
Yeah,
large
the
model.
A-rack.
A
Yeah.
pain rack,
If it was full
and
size, yeah.
and the hanging tree, and it was like
Hanging tree, yeah.
I just. Even when I came across them in the book, and we weren't going to put any images up on the show when we spoke about this before. We weren't going to put images up, but it's proper grim, really.
Well, yeah, but then you think about it. All the other companies, well, including Aurora, were producing aircraft from World War II, shooting down the opposition with loads of flames.
Yeah, I know there is a relative kind of hypocrisy going on there, because you could argue that a Junkers 87,
and that was real. I mean, this wasn't real.
yeah,
This was was jokey in the same way as jokey with a tongue firmly in the cheek, probably. But
I need to correct
these
myself.
days you can still,
yeah. I was
these days you can get anything you like.
Yeah. The monster scenes figures, they weren't looking for love. They just wanted to be loved. That was the narrative of the comic. Yeah, and it was an attempt at softening it, but as you say, that was it. The cat was out of the bag, and they couldn't rescue the situation. I have to laugh slightly, because a couple of years ago there was some moral outrage in one of the newspapers in this country, if you can call them newspapers, and it was, is this the sickest toy ever? And you're just like, I can't wait to read this. What's this? Blimey, God, what's this? It was a model kit out of a ruined Afghan barn. A ruined Afghan building, rather, but like a barn or whatever. And you're just like, did I miss something? The sickest toy ever. It's a model of a ruined barn for serious model makers who you can buy ruined European cafes.
You can buy ruined virtually everything.
Yeah, but
ruined
these
church. Would you like that?
Yeah, diorama accessories. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's disappointing. That's not,
I think these days, because there's much more in the world. I think the trouble is, in the 60s and 70s, there wasn't much else in the world to worry about. The internet hadn't started, so it all had to go through newspapers and local television and radio reports and things like that. These days, we haven't got time to worry about if so-and-so is producing a model of a wrecked Iraqi barn or a wrecked whatever church or building or cafe or whatever that was blown up during this particular war or something or other. And of course, there is so many garage companies producing limited kits in resins and things like that at horrendous prices normally that the kiddywinkies are not going to be able to buy anyway, probably not be able to afford, unless they really save up their pocket money. It has changed. It's arguably for the best, but it's certainly not for the worst. From the modelling point of view, I don't think we'll ever, because you can still get those. You can go into loads and loads of sites and get remade versions in resin of what the monster scenes were. There were two actually that never came out, which is the dungeon and the animal pit. They have been actually reissued. In fact, the Dennis Prince, who wrote his company, has issued those two kits. In the big Aurora type square boxes, whatever, they've never been issued before.
In fact,
so they can be got.
With you, I think if the monster scenes came out these days,
they'd be totally ignored.
They'd be totally ignored. I mean, the closest we've come to a whiff of controversy or controversy, depending on where you use it in a sentence, is I think it was Revell a couple of years ago. There was at least probably about 30 seconds of outrage that they'd reboxed. It was actually Pegasus models, I think it was, and it was their Hanabu German flying saucer secret project. Yeah, and there was at least a kind of like a saucer full of, pardon the pun, a saucer full of outrage that this model was rewriting history and pretending that the Nazis had won World War II. Yada yada yada. What's the next thing I need to be outraged upon? And Revell, I think they kind of quietly kind of like kept the kit back for a while. The outrage moved on to be outraged against something else, and it's back on the market and nobody cares.
I mean, have they not seen all the other Luftwaffe 46 kits that are out there? So it's just sort of like, duh.
Well,
and in fact, Matt, that particular Hanabu design, there's about 6 different kits of it.
Yes, yeah. But Andy Yanchus, what is your overriding memory of him as a person, as a man?
Being very clever at his particular job, and also you could irritate him quite easily. He didn't suffer fools gladly, which is. But there was a famous occasion. I will use the both our friends JC Carbonell in France. JC, if you're watching, hi. He's twice on occasions used some pictures from me that I wasn't going to use, and said, don't use these because these are so. So JC did. I got the blame for. He said, "Oh, you bet." I said, "I didn't know." JC. But Andy then said, "Oh, terribly sorry about this. Here, have a model kit." And he used to give me something out of his collection. It was extremely rare. I mean, some of the kits I've got from him. And he said, like cars, particularly, he said, "You're the car guy. You'll never build it. I'll never build it. You build it." So the legacy is an extremely interesting man. Unfortunately, only probably of interest to us in the business who know who his name is. Otherwise, hey, who is he? He didn't get, unfortunately, an obit in the Times, but probably people of our ilk don't as such. But it's strange, really, sort of just trying to describe him, because he was a Renaissance man in many ways. He had a lot of interest in things, but a lot of it he kept. I mean, this is absolutely true. It wasn't until I was staying in his flat, and that was the last time, was probably in the last 5 years, or rather, sorry, the flat, the top floor of the brownstone, and I found some records, some LPs, country and western. And I said to Andy, "Oh yeah, I'm a great country," because it's country now, not country. I'm a great country. I never knew that about him. Looking at him, you think, he's not a country fan. Yes, he was a country fan. So yeah, I'm still fine. I probably still will find things out about him.
I think one of the things, and this is a truth about the kit industry in general, but I think there may be people out there who probably never heard of Andy. They may never kind of may never know the history of what he contributed to Aurora, but the chances are somewhere down the line there'll be one of the kit companies, it could be Revell, it could be somebody else, will reissue a kit and they'll buy it, and that kit has got Andy's DNA in it, and that's a hell of a legacy.
And I actually think we ought to. I mean, without getting too sort of serious about it, but those of us who knew him, that Phil and Pete and Rick and Nick Argento knew him as well, and Dean Milano in Chicago, who used to work for Revell. We ought to have some sort of trophy for him or something. Andy would have hated it, he wouldn't. Oh no. But something, I don't know where it will be or whatever. I mean, what form it would take, but just something or other. But there's not many people in the modelling business who really make their mark. And I think Andy is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever realised it, but he did. He certainly made his mark.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You may have witnessed tonight, via the auspices of the Interesting Modelling Company, we might actually inaugurate the Andy Yanchus Award. And so we might, because we're doing the Festival of Modelling in a month's time, I think what we might probably do is perhaps for 2022 is run a competition, and based around something, Aurora or Atlantis or one of those things, and then we'll give out the Andy Yanchus Award. There we go. We've actually started something there. So there you go, Matt. You planted the seed. We're going to grow that one. So
right.
Fabulous stuff. Right, we've got a couple of questions here from people, if you don't mind fielding some questions.
Yeah, no, fine.
We've got one here from Simon Dixon, and he says, question to Matt, if possible, with his BBC and TV work, were the budgets generous? yeah. I'm laughing. Sorry, I'm preempting your answer here. Were the budgets generous for effects, or was it all Heath Robinson as it looks today compared with all the modern digital work?
Yes. Right. Haven't heard this before. Right. I will tell you the story, which is actually quite true. That when Blake 7 started, when we looked at the budgets, which of course is written on a piece of paper at that particular point, not on this stuff on screens. It was 70. It was 78, wasn't it? But no, it's still written down. The effects budget per program for Blake 7 was £50. I now pause. A lot of people have heard. I've told this before. But unfortunately, there is a BBC logic about this. Blake 7 filled the slot, which was held by Softly Softly, which was the Z-Cars spin-off, i.e. a cop show. Unlike American cop shows, where it's all gangs and car chases, Softly Softly was more or less, as it says in the title, low key. So there wasn't. They just put £50 in as in case they wanted something or other at some point. But we inherited the £50. Now, yes, it did go up for Blake. Not a lot, but it did go up. But the budgets, generous is not a word I would have used. We were given budgets, but I always say firstly, we were not paid to do it right. We were paid to do it right the first time, which is vastly different to most film. Hey, the Bond film's coming out. They weren't paid to do it right the first time. How many Astons do they have? They actually had the rollover. Was it for Quantum or whatever it was? They had Aston had 7 of them or something or other, which they knew were going to get wrecked. But they got the Guinness Book of World Records for the rollover. We wouldn't have had that. Blowing up a car, you'd have one. You got one guy doing it. So So in that way, I think we had to be quite clever, in that we just literally had to work with virtually nothing. We were very good at adapting stuff. I'm not sure Heath Robinson actually was quite a clever guy, what he designed. So if we compare with Heath Robinson, I'm actually quite pleased about it. But yes, they were never going to be the same as movie budgets. Now, the budgets on Doctor Who, New Who, as compared with Classic Who, are a lot more. They're still probably not enough, but they are still a lot more than they ever were, because people expect more on the screen. And we're looking recently for a completely different reason at some old series from Classic Who, and you sometimes you grit your teeth. I wish that effect or whatever. Not just effect. It can be other things. It could be scenery that that always isn't quite, or doesn't quite like whatever. Or the trouble is, effects are the ones everybody spots. Say, hey, they never rarely spot a bad costume or bad makeup or that matter, bad scenery, bad effect. Oh, the spaceship has fallen off the line. That must.
You say that. As I was saying before the show, I've been watching a few of the old Sylvester McCoy, the very last two seasons of original Who, and there are occasions where I honestly think the acting, it was one take and that's it, because there are some line readings and there are some directorial kind of decisions where I'm sat there and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, can you run another take on that? Because that's really doesn't come across quite as well as it should have done. And apparently know that they really were kind of like, is it good enough yet? Right, next.
Have we got it in the can? Yes, a lot of it was like that. The time to shoot these sort of things. I mean, changing programs to Blake, to my infamous flying hairdryer, the alien scout ship. I maintain if I'd never given away the secret on Swap Shop, or was it Superstore, nobody would have ever known there were two Morphin Richards hairdryers stuck together. But that literally was a last minute. Oh, we need this Zen screen. This ship is going to be on the screen for about 1.5 seconds. Now, I've rummaged down the box of spares, which happen to have these bodies of the hairdryer. They're plastic moldings, boxes full of plastic moldings. I stuck them together. R2D, that shot it from the back. You couldn't tell what they were. On Z, it was a picture within a picture, and you couldn't tell unless because I gave it away on the kids' programs. That's my fault, mea culpa on that. Now, if ILM was making it, they'd have had 6 months to make the model and sort of 6 weeks to film it. We're not in that. We were never actually in that league. We couldn't be. The money just was not there to do it. I mean, for Blake, I had to get through in series 2 when I was just doing the miniature filming. I'd get through 6 setups a day of model Liberator or whatever, London, whatever, flying and things, flying hairdryers, flying, and a lot of them are flying, so you had to light them so the wires weren't shown or what else, using front projection as well. Now, it's the movies is a completely different. All right, these days they've got CGI, and the problem I find with CGI is you can do anything. You literally can do anything with CGI, which means if you see a bad CGI shot, it should never have got through, because you can do anything with it. With 3D effects, let's say 3D, or there's 3D CGIs, but 3D effects, the traditional, yes, you've got to be very, very careful how you do it, and more to the point, how it's edited. I mean, we always say in the business, we say there are 3 important things with good story, good acting, good direction. There is a 4th, good editing. A good editor will save a bad program, and probably vice versa. So many Who's I've looked at, for the sake of cut a bit, you don't need it, but because they were made to length. The new ones almost run too fast. 3/4 of an hour, that's it. Quarter of an hour of adverts. It's made for the American market. Here, no, they're all 24, 30 normally. The episode's long. And each story was four parts, 2 hours of television, usually an hour too long. The 6-parters certainly were. They were certainly 2 episodes too long. Cut them down. So you really want to literally put the scissors in, or press the buttons as you do these. In the old days, put the scissors to cut them down. So in fact, they move faster. And a lot of those older stories, which we sometimes look at and think, it's just moving to. Why didn't they cut away? You could actually improve. Get your home editing system out and improve them.
It's funny you say that, because one of the Doctor Who episodes that I know you worked on, which was Planet of the Spiders, because that's when you create the forest of spider. It's honestly, I think in one of the episodes, the cliffhanger recap of the next episode is something like 10 minutes of the previous episode, and it's just it
was obviously underrunning. Yep, that's happened. It's that long, because
it's that long chase where it's like Pertwee's chasing the guy on the hobbycraft and the auto gyro and everything, and it's like previously in Doctor Who, the whole episode.
Virtually, yeah. Yes, it was obviously they were a bit short of mileage on that, of footage. So, because if you're making just a one-off like New Who, as such. You have got to really cut it really as tight as you possibly can, and sometimes perhaps too tightly. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere.
I'll tell you what, if you're up for it, we certainly like to have you back on again, and for you to rattle, to go through some of your anecdotes of working on Who, Blake, and other shows. Moonbase
wind
3.
Me up, I can go on for ages, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Moonbase 3. Well, it's easy for me because I
Moonbase 3
and listen, but it's Matt. It's been. I've just got another comment here from Gary Powell. He says Atlantis re-release of the Unreal Roller show rod filled a huge gap in my collection. Very appreciative.
Yeah, that's a monogram kit. They got all the old Tom Daniel kits. They're all doing them. That's one I've got to get. Actually, I haven't got that one. I need to get that one. I should get on the email. Pete, send me an Unreal Road. Yeah.
Stan Codlin says, built all the monster kits in the 60s. Remember, they were really expensive in the UK. They were. As for Outrage, I remember collecting Mars Attacks cards before they were banned. Yeah, some Mars Attacks. And we have one from Anthony Bird, who says, remember happy days with my brother going through the Aurora catalogue, ticking off what we would like. Poor family, so what we might want and what we got, not get, sadly. But I do remember that was a very happy family time. Well, same here, Anthony. I mean, I look back and, like I say, walking past that Cordings window, there's the square boxes of the prehistoric scenes, the smaller ones. So it was things like Cro-Magnon Man and, Caveman, the Cave Woman, and the saber-toothed tiger.
Saber-toothed tiger,
yeah. The tar pit. God, that was grim. And I just remember thinking, I want them, because I was like mad on dinosaurs. I was 7 years old. I was mad on dinosaurs. Who wasn't? And
every 7-year-old's mad on dinosaurs.
Yeah, they were
boys and girls. They're all mad.
Well, yeah, exactly.
They were compared. Yes, Airfix was too bob. That was the problem.
Well, we could go to the local news agents, and I could pick up an Airfix kit for 15p. The Aurora kits were something like about £1.20. I mean, as the Americans say, do the math. But I will say the dinosaur thing never leaves you, because it was about 20 years ago when they were doing the Walking with Dinosaurs, and they did the exhibition in Bristol, and I went with some friends, and we were walking up the steps to Bristol Museum, and they weren't moving fast enough for me, so I ended up running up the steps to get into the exhibition before them. And they said literally all they could see was me running up the stairs with my arms flapping. And they said, it's dinosaurs. And I'm like, yeah, it's dinosaurs. Always dinosaurs. Yeah, if you can have you back on the show, Matt, that'd be brilliant. But it's been a pleasure tonight to hear you talking about Andy, because like I say, I've been catching up on the history of Aurora, and anybody out there, if you've got a bit of spare cash and you want to read, it is a rattling good read, I have to say, about one of the most bizarre and eclectic kit companies out there. It's well worth your time.
We better leave with a picture of Andy. That's one we didn't show. There he is in Aurora R&D. Aurora made toys as well. I think he's got some sort of swing ball thing there. But yeah, sadly missed. It wasn't unexpected. He had been ill for some years, but it's always a shock when you're actually told about it. But
Matt, as always, it really
I
is a tremendous
will raise
honor.
a glass to Andy. If anybody else is out there wants to raise a glass to Andy Yanchus.
Matt, it's been an absolute
pleasure. R.I.P. Andy,
tonight.
You won't be forgotten.
No, absolutely, and we'll make sure that's the case. We'd love to have you on again. I really appreciate your time tonight, and like I say, apologies for the mix-up the other week when you were going to be on, and I completely forgot about it. But I'm from Dudley.
You forgot. It was your fault, wasn't it? That wasn't my fault. I have the email to prove it. Yes, right.
It was totally my fault. I do apologise. Matt, a pleasure. Thank you. We will be back on Sunday with our news programme, and we're also still working on our Festival of Modelling. I'm not going to play the trailer for it because apparently the audio is too loud. So anyway, on that note, big thank you to Matt. Big thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight. We'll see you on Sunday. As always, take care, stay out of trouble, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.